Don't forget what Dad taught me about storms. That was the sentence my son wrote inside a Christmas card that arrived 3 days before the holiday. And the moment I read it, the coffee mug nearly slipped from my hands. Ethan had not used those words in over 20 years. Not since he was 10 years old and terrified of thunderstorms rolling across our little town in northern Ohio. Back then, my husband Noel had created a secret phrase for him. A distress code. Something Ethan could say if he was scared but too embarrassed to ask for help directly. I sat alone at my kitchen table staring at the card while snow drifted quietly outside my window. The Christmas tree in the corner glowed softly with white lights, reflecting against the glass ornaments Noel and I had collected over 35 years of marriage. The house smelled like cinnamon candles and fresh gingerbread, but suddenly none of it felt warm anymore. My hands turned cold, because Ethan never forgot things like that, especially not that phrase. Vanessa thought I was just a weak-old woman. I could hear it every time she smiled too carefully at me during family dinners. Every time she spoke slower than necessary, like I was fragile or confused. "Helen, you really shouldn't stress yourself out at your age," she loved to say whenever I asked simple questions about Ethan or the grandchildren. At first, I thought she was trying to be kind. Then I realized kindness doesn't make you feel small afterward. I looked back down at the card. The handwriting was shaky, not dramatically, just enough for a mother to notice. Ethan had always written in clean, careful lines, even as a boy, especially after becoming an engineer. But this looked rushed, nervous, like someone was standing nearby while he wrote it. My eyes moved to the bottom of the card where Vanessa had added her own message in bright silver ink. "Can't wait to see you Christmas Eve. Ethan's been so busy lately. You know how forgetful he gets." I stared at the extra O's in "so." Vanessa always overdid things when she was nervous. My stomach tightened. Outside, wind rattled the bare branches against the kitchen window. I folded the card carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Then I reached for my phone and called Ethan. It rang twice before going to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. 10 minutes later, Vanessa called me back instead. "Helen," she said brightly. Too brightly. "Sorry, Ethan's in the shower. He's been working nonstop this week." I closed my eyes for a moment. In the background, I heard nothing. No television. No running water. No footsteps. Just silence. "I was calling to thank him for the card," I said quietly. "Oh, he almost forgot to mail those," Vanessa replied with a small laugh. "Honestly, if I didn't organize everything around here, nothing would ever get done." There it was again, that careful little reminder that she controlled the house. The schedules, the conversations, the access. I walked slowly toward the garage door near the laundry room and rested my hand against the knob. Noel used to keep his old blue toolbox out there. Ethan's distress code had started in that garage during a summer storm when the power went out and our son was too scared to admit he was crying. "If you ever feel trapped," Noel had told him gently, "talk about storms." Vanessa kept talking on the phone, filling the silence with cheerful nonsense, but I barely heard her anymore. Because for the first time in years, I realized something terrible. My son hadn't abandoned me. He was asking me to save him. After my call with Vanessa ended, I stood in the garage for a very long time staring at Noel's old blue toolbox sitting beneath the shelves near the back wall. Dust covered the metal lid now, a thin layer of neglect that only appears after years of silence settle over a house. Noel used to keep every screw, nail, and wrench perfectly organized. Even during his chemotherapy treatments, he would shuffle out there with his coffee mug and spend hours fixing things that did not need fixing. He used to say working with his hands helped him think clearly. After he passed away 3 winters ago, I stopped going into the garage unless I absolutely had to. Some rooms become too heavy after loss. The garage was one of them. I crouched slowly beside the toolbox and ran my fingers across the faded blue paint. Ethan had been 12 the first time Noel taught him the storm code. A tornado warning had rolled through town late one August night while the power was out. Ethan had tried so hard to act brave for me, but Noel always noticed the things people hid. "Fear does not make you weak," he told our son while rain hammered against the windows. But some people cannot ask for help out loud. After that, storms became their secret language. I leaned back against the wall and closed my eyes. Suddenly, memories I had ignored for months started returning one by one. Small things, quiet things. Ethan canceling dinner plans at the last minute while Vanessa apologized for him in the background. The way his smile disappeared whenever she entered a room. Last Easter, he reached for my hand during dessert like he wanted to say something, but Vanessa immediately started talking over him about a kitchen remodel. At Thanksgiving, I noticed Ethan checking his phone every few minutes like he was nervous about missing something important. Back then, I told myself all marriages go through stressful seasons. Now I was no longer sure. I walked back inside and poured myself another cup of coffee, even though it was already nearly 7 at night. Outside, snow covered the neighborhood in soft white layers. The streetlights glowed pale gold against the icy sidewalks. Most of my neighbors had family visiting for the holidays. I could see Christmas trees shining through windows up and down the street. My house stayed quiet. Too quiet. Ethan and Vanessa used to visit every Sunday before Noel got sick. After the funeral, everything changed slowly enough that I almost missed it happening. The phone calls became shorter, then less frequent, then mostly handled by Vanessa. Ethan is exhausted. Ethan is traveling. Ethan forgot to call. Sometimes weeks passed without hearing his voice at all. One afternoon 6 months earlier, I drove to their house unannounced with homemade chicken soup after Ethan mentioned having the flu. Vanessa answered the door wearing an expensive cream sweater and a smile that never reached her eyes. "You really should call first, Helen," she said gently. "You know Ethan needs his rest." I remember hearing movement upstairs. Heavy footsteps pacing quickly across the floor. Then silence. Vanessa never invited me in that afternoon. At the time, I drove home embarrassed for showing up unexpectedly. Now the memory sat differently in my chest. Colder. Sharper. I carried my coffee into the living room and lowered myself onto the couch beside the Christmas tree. The old clock above the fireplace ticked steadily through the silence. Then my eyes drifted toward a framed photograph sitting beside the lamp. It was taken 5 years ago at Lake Erie during a family vacation. Ethan stood beside me smiling with one arm around Vanessa while wind blew through his dark hair. At first glance, it looked like a happy family photo. But for the first time, I noticed something I had somehow missed all these years. Ethan's smile looked tired, and Vanessa's hand around his wrist looked less like affection and more like control. The next morning, I woke before sunrise with a heaviness in my chest that felt impossible to ignore. The house creaked softly around me as the furnace pushed warm air through the vents. For a moment, I lay still beneath the quilt Noel and I bought during our trip to Vermont nearly 20 years ago, staring at the pale winter light slipping through the curtains. Then I reached for my phone on the nightstand and checked for missed calls. Nothing from Ethan. Only a weather alert warning about freezing rain expected later that evening. Storms. The words settled into my stomach again. I moved slowly through my morning routine, making toast I barely touched and feeding the small gray cat that wandered onto my porch after Noel passed away and never left. Around 9 o'clock, I drove into town for groceries, though I mostly needed an excuse to think. The roads were slick with old snow, and Christmas decorations still hung from nearly every storefront downtown. Garland wrapped around lampposts. Red ribbons fluttered in the icy wind. The whole town looked cheerful in the way small American towns try very hard to during the holidays. But underneath all that brightness, something felt wrong to me now. While standing in line at Miller's Market, I heard someone call my name. Helen Whitmore? I turned and found Claire Dawson smiling at me from beside the magazine rack. Claire had lived 2 houses down from Ethan and Vanessa for years before moving into a condo last spring. She was around Ethan's age, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes and silver streaks beginning to appear in her brown hair. We chatted politely at first about the weather and holiday shopping before she hesitated slightly. "I have not seen Ethan lately," she said carefully. "How is he doing?" The question itself felt strange. "Busy, I suppose," I answered. "Why do you ask?" Claire glanced down at the groceries in her cart before speaking again. "I just worried about him sometimes." My fingers tightened slightly around the handle of my basket. "What do you mean?" She looked uncomfortable immediately. "Oh, maybe it is not my place. I probably should not say anything. But people only say that when they desperately want to say more." We left the store together and stood near our cars while snow drifted lightly around us. Claire lowered her voice. "A few months before I moved, I started noticing things. Ethan barely came outside anymore. Vanessa always answered the door, and whenever neighbors tried talking to him, she somehow appeared within seconds. My heartbeat slowed into something cold and focused. Claire continued carefully. One night around September, I was walking my dog past their house after dark. Their curtains were open in the downstairs office. Ethan was sitting alone at his desk, just staring at the wall, completely still. I remember thinking he looked exhausted. I swallowed hard. Did he say anything to you? Claire shook her head slowly. No. But when he noticed me outside, he looked startled, like he had forgotten someone could actually see him. Wind swept through the parking lot, carrying loose snow across the asphalt. Claire hesitated again before adding quietly, Helen, I know this may sound strange, but your daughter-in-law always made me nervous. Not because she was rude, because she was too controlled, too polished. Some people smile so perfectly that it stops feeling natural. I thought about Vanessa's phone call. The night before, her cheerful voice, the silence behind it. Suddenly, another memory surfaced without warning. Last Christmas Eve, Ethan accidentally dropped a wine glass during dinner. Vanessa laughed immediately, but not kindly. Honestly, Ethan, she said while cleaning the spill, what would you do without me keeping your life together? Everyone at the table smiled awkwardly, including me. But Ethan did not smile. He just stared down at his plate in silence. At the time, I convinced myself married couples tease each other sometimes. Now I wondered how many things I had explained away simply because the truth felt too uncomfortable to face. That afternoon, I drove home slowly through freezing rain with Claire's words repeating quietly in my mind. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky had turned the dull gray color Ohio winters wear for weeks at a time. I sat inside the car for nearly 10 minutes with the engine running, staring at the wreath hanging on my front door. Noel used to replace that wreath every December without fail. Fresh pine branches, red berries, white ribbon. He said traditions mattered because they reminded people they belonged somewhere. I wondered when Ethan had stopped feeling that way. Inside the house, I removed my coat carefully and walked straight toward the small desk tucked beneath the living room window. Noel handled most of our paperwork during our marriage, but after he passed, I forced myself to learn every account number, every bill, every investment. Grief teaches women things they never expected to know. I opened my laptop and searched Ethan's company online. Whitmore Tech Solutions still appeared successful at first glance. The website looked polished. Corporate photos, client testimonials. But something caught my attention almost immediately. Ethan's name no longer appeared listed under executive leadership. I frowned and clicked through several pages again to make sure I had not missed it. Nothing. Vanessa's name, however, appeared twice. Chief Operations Officer. Financial Director. My stomach tightened. Ethan built that company from the tiny spare bedroom in this very house 15 years earlier. I still remembered him sitting at the dining room table at 2 in the morning surrounded by coffee cups and coding books while Noel quietly brought him sandwiches. That company was his pride, his independence. Slowly, I opened another browser tab and searched public business filings for the county. It took less than 20 minutes before my pulse began to pound. 3 months earlier, Ethan had transferred majority operational control to Vanessa. 2 weeks after that, a large business loan had been approved using company assets as collateral. I stared at the screen in silence. Then I noticed another filing tied to their home address. Refinancing paperwork. My fingers went cold against the keyboard. Ethan once promised Noel he would never place debt against his home unless absolutely necessary. A house should feel safe, he used to say. Not temporary. Yet here it was in black and white. A refinancing agreement finalized only 6 weeks ago. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Something was very wrong. The phone rang suddenly, making me jump. Vanessa's name appeared across the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Helen, she said sweetly, I wanted to remind you Christmas Eve starts at 6. Ethan has been under so much stress lately, so we are trying to keep things calm this year. Calm. Another word that sounded harmless until you heard the way she used it. I understand, I replied quietly. How is Ethan feeling? There was the briefest pause. Tiny. Barely noticeable. Tired, she answered. Honestly, he works too much. Sometimes I have to step in and make decisions for him because he gets overwhelmed. My eyes drifted back toward the refinancing documents glowing on my laptop screen. That must be difficult for you, I said softly. Vanessa laughed lightly. Marriage means carrying each other sometimes. Behind her voice, I thought I heard something faint. A door shutting quickly. Then silence. Is Ethan nearby? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. He stepped outside for a minute. I looked through my own living room window at freezing rain coating the bare trees outside. In this weather? Her laugh came too fast. You know, Ethan, always restless. I said nothing after that. Silence has a way of unsettling dishonest people. Vanessa filled it immediately. Well, we will see you Christmas Eve. And Helen, her voice softened carefully. Please try not to worry so much. Stress is not healthy at your age. After we hung up, I remained perfectly still in my chair. Then I slowly opened the desk drawer beside me and removed the small leather notebook where Noelle used to keep important information. Bank contacts, lawyer names, emergency numbers. I turned to the first blank page and began writing everything down. The following morning, freezing rain coated the neighborhood in a thin layer of ice that made everything outside my window look fragile and dangerously beautiful. I barely slept the night before. Every few hours I woke up thinking about Ethan sitting somewhere inside that large house pretending everything was normal while quietly asking for help in the only way he still could. By 8 o'clock, I had already made 3 phone calls. The first was to Harold Bennett, the attorney who handled Noelle's estate years ago. The second was to our longtime accountant, Diane Mercer. The third was to the local bank branch where Ethan opened his very first savings account when he was 16 years old. I did not tell any of them everything yet. I simply asked careful questions. Quiet questions. The kind older women learn to ask after decades of surviving disappointment without showing panic. Around noon, Diane returned my call. Helen, she said gently, I probably should not discuss your son's finances directly, but I can tell you something feels unusual. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table with my notebook open in front of me. How unusual? I asked. Diane hesitated. Ethan used to personally review every major business transaction. For the past year, almost everything has come through Vanessa instead. And honestly, some of the decisions do not sound like him. My chest tightened, such as aggressive refinancing, liquidating low-risk investments, pulling from long-term reserves. Ethan was always extremely conservative financially. Noelle raised him that way. I stared down at the steam rising from my untouched tea. Conservative. Careful. That was Ethan. Even as a child, he hated wasting money. When he was 11 years old, he once cried after accidentally losing a $5 bill Noelle gave him for the county fair. I should have been paying attention, he kept saying through tears while Noelle hugged him beside the truck. That boy did not suddenly become reckless overnight. Diane lowered her voice slightly. There is something else. I gripped the phone tighter. What? About 6 months ago, Ethan canceled a private meeting with me 3 times in a row. The last time, Vanessa attended instead and insisted she could handle everything for him. Silence settled between us. Then Diane added carefully, Helen, your son looked exhausted the last time I saw him. After we hung up, I opened Noelle's notebook again and added another line beneath the others. Control of meetings. Financial isolation. Fear. The words looked cold on paper. Clinical. But underneath each one sat a deeper truth I still struggled to fully accept. My son was disappearing in front of people who loved him, and somehow none of us stopped it in time. Around 3 that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Ethan. My heart jumped so hard I nearly dropped the device. I answered immediately. Ethan. For 2 seconds, neither of us spoke. I could hear faint breathing on the other end. Then finally his voice came quietly through the line. Hey, Mom. Just hearing him say those words nearly broke me. He sounded tired. Not physically tired. Hollow tired. The kind that settles deep inside someone after carrying too much alone for too long. Are you all right? I asked carefully. Another silence. Then a soft laugh that did not sound real. You always ask that. In the background, I heard what sounded like cabinet doors opening and closing quickly. Movement. I got your card, I said softly. I figured you would. His voice lowered slightly. Dad always said storms pass eventually. My eyes filled instantly, but I kept my voice steady. Only if people survive them first. Another pause. Longer this time. Then suddenly Ethan spoke quickly, almost under his breath. Mom, do you still keep Dad's emergency folders in the house? Every nerve in my body went cold. Noelle kept copies of legal records, property deeds, and backup account information inside a locked filing cabinet in the basement for emergencies. Ethan knew that. Vanessa knew that too. Before I could answer, another voice appeared faintly in the background. Vanessa, who are you talking to? The line went completely silent. Then Ethan said in a normal, cheerful voice that sounded painfully rehearsed, "I should let you go, Mom. See you Christmas Eve." And just like that, the call ended. The moment the call ended, I sat motionless at my kitchen table listening to the old wall clock tick above the stove. Emergency folders. Ethan had not mentioned those files in years. Noel created them shortly after his cancer diagnosis when he realized how quickly life could become uncertain. Copies of deeds, insurance policies, investment accounts, legal authorizations. Everything organized carefully inside thick manila folders labeled in Noel's neat handwriting. If something ever goes wrong, he used to say, panic wastes time. Back then, I thought he was preparing me for widowhood. Now I understood he had been preparing me for survival. I carried my tea downstairs to the basement and switched on the light. The familiar smell of cedar storage boxes and old paper filled the cool air. Noel's filing cabinet still stood exactly where he left it beside the workbench. For 3 years, I avoided opening it unless absolutely necessary. Some griefs become easier to live beside when you leave them untouched. But now my hands moved without hesitation. Inside the top drawer sat the emergency folders arranged alphabetically. Whitmore Family Trust, property records, corporate documents, backup accounts. I pulled them out slowly and carried them upstairs one by one. Snow tapped softly against the windows while evening settled outside. By 6 o'clock, my dining room table had disappeared beneath stacks of paperwork. Most of it looked ordinary at first glance. Then the patterns started appearing. Small things, quiet things, changes in beneficiary percentages, access authorizations added 6 months earlier, new signatures attached to refinancing agreements. Vanessa's name repeated over and over again across documents connected to Ethan's business accounts. My chest tightened when I noticed one particular form dated 4 months earlier. Temporary financial incapacity authorization. I stared at the words for a long time. Ethan had signed partial financial control to Vanessa in the event he became mentally or emotionally unable to manage business decisions independently. My son, the same boy who used to triple-check his homework before turning it in because he hated mistakes. The same man who once spent 2 full weeks researching lawn mowers before buying one because he believed important decisions required patience. He would never sign something like this lightly. Never. Unless someone slowly convinced him he could no longer trust himself. The realization settled over me with terrible clarity. Vanessa had not taken control suddenly. She had done it gradually, quietly, piece by piece. The way ivy crawls across a house until one day the walls underneath begin cracking. My phone buzzed again just after 7. This time it was Harold Bennett. "Helen," he said carefully, "I reviewed the refinancing documents you emailed me." I gripped the phone tighter. And a long pause followed. "I think your son may be in serious legal trouble if these loans default. The company assets appear heavily leveraged." My stomach dropped. Could Vanessa have done this without him knowing? "Not entirely," Harold replied gently. "But people under emotional pressure sometimes agree to things they would normally question." Emotional pressure. Such polite words for something so cruel. I walked toward the living room window and looked outside at the dark street glowing beneath icy Christmas lights. Somewhere across town, Ethan was probably sitting inside that beautiful, expensive house feeling trapped in his own life while pretending everything was fine. Harold spoke again, more quietly this time. "There is something else you should know. If Ethan used Noel's old trust documents as collateral references without proper legal review, Vanessa could potentially gain partial access to family property protections." Every muscle in my body went still. That was why Ethan asked about the emergency folders. Fear moved through me then. Not panic. Something colder. Sharper. Because for the first time, I understood this was no longer just about money or control. Vanessa was reaching toward the last thing Noel spent months trying to protect before he died. Our family security. Our home. Our future. After the call ended, I walked slowly to the garage and stared once more at Noel's blue toolbox sitting beneath the shelves. Then I opened it carefully and found exactly what I hoped was still there. Beneath old wrenches and faded instruction manuals sat a small silver key taped to the bottom compartment. The backup key to Noel's private safe deposit box at First National Bank. The next morning, I arrived at First National Bank 15 minutes before opening time with Noel's silver key resting quietly inside my coat pocket. Snow covered the sidewalks in uneven white patches, and the freezing wind cut sharply across the nearly empty parking lot. I stood outside the bank entrance watching employees move behind the glass doors while Christmas music drifted faintly through hidden speakers overhead. Everything around me looked normal, safe, ordinary. That was the frightening thing about situations like this. Most people imagine control arrives loudly. Angry arguments, broken dishes, screaming matches. But the worst kinds happen slowly enough that even the people living inside them stop recognizing the danger. When the doors finally opened, the young teller greeted me with the careful politeness people often use with older women. "Good morning, ma'am." I smiled softly and asked to speak with the branch manager regarding a family safe deposit box. 20 minutes later, I sat inside a small private room while a gray-haired manager named Thomas unlocked the metal box connected to Noel's account. "Take your time, Mrs. Whitmore," he said kindly before leaving me alone. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside sat several neatly organized envelopes, old stock certificates, backup property records, and one sealed letter with my name written across the front in Noel's handwriting. Seeing those familiar letters nearly took the air from my lungs. For a moment, I simply stared at it. Then I opened the envelope carefully. "Helen, if you are reading this, something has gone wrong." That single sentence sent coldness rushing through my body. Noel continued in the same calm handwriting he used his entire life. "I have spent months reviewing the financial protections around our assets and Ethan's company. If pressure is ever placed on Ethan emotionally, he will try to carry it alone. That is who he is. But isolation makes good people vulnerable." I pressed my fingers against my mouth as tears filled my eyes. Noel knew. Somehow, long before any of this happened, he understood exactly the kind of man our son would become. Loving, loyal, quietly self-sacrificing to the point of danger. I kept reading. Inside the second envelope are copies of legal protections that cannot be altered without your authorization. I pray you never need them. But if someone ever tries to separate Ethan from his own judgment, do not confuse silence for consent. Help him remember who he is. By the time I finished the letter, my vision blurred completely. I sat there for several minutes trying to steady my breathing before opening the second envelope. Inside were trust amendments Noel filed 6 months before his death. Safeguards, backup authorizations, protected family assets requiring dual approval between me and Ethan before any permanent transfers could happen. Vanessa clearly did not know these documents existed. Otherwise, she would never have pushed so aggressively toward refinancing and access control. For the first time in days, I felt something besides fear. Clarity. Noel had seen the cracks forming before any of us did. And he prepared for them quietly, the same way he prepared for storms his entire life. When I returned home that afternoon, another message waited on my voicemail. "Vanessa." "Hi, Helen," she said warmly. "Just checking whether you are still bringing the pecan pie tomorrow night. Ethan has been a little emotional lately, so I really want Christmas Eve to stay positive and low stress." Emotional. There was that word again. Soft-sounding. Dismissive. Designed to make weakness sound natural. I deleted the message without returning the call. Then I carried Noel's envelopes upstairs and locked them inside the fireproof safe hidden behind winter blankets in my bedroom closet. Outside, the storm warning sirens began sounding faintly across town as freezing rain started falling again. I stood by the bedroom window watching icy wind bend the trees while memories surfaced one after another. Ethan at age 7 helping Noel board up windows before a storm. Ethan at 16 driving through heavy rain for the first time while Noel calmly taught him how not to panic. Ethan at 35 standing silently in his own kitchen while his wife answered every question directed toward him. My son had been disappearing slowly right in front of me. But storms reveal things too. And for the first time since Noel died, I no longer felt helpless. Christmas Eve arrived beneath a sky the color of steel. Freezing rain glazed the roads in thin sheets of ice, and the wind carried sharp bursts of snow across the empty streets as I drove toward Ethan's house just before 6 o'clock. Noel's envelopes rested inside my leather bag on the passenger seat beside the pecan pie Vanessa insisted I bring. The windshield wipers moved steadily back and forth while old Christmas songs played softly through the radio, but my stomach remained tight the entire drive. I kept thinking about Ethan's voice on the phone. Hollow, careful, like a man speaking through walls. Their house looked beautiful from the outside. White lights lined the roof. garland wrapped around the porch railings. Through the large front windows, I could see a glowing Christmas tree standing beside the fireplace. Anyone driving past would think it was the home of a successful, happy family. Vanessa opened the front door before I even reached it. "Helen," she said brightly while stepping aside for me to enter. Her cream-colored sweater matched the expensive holiday decorations perfectly. Vanilla candles burned throughout the house. Everything smelled warm and polished and staged. "Be careful," she added lightly while watching me remove my boots. "The floor gets slippery this time of year." I smiled softly. "I still know how to walk, Vanessa." For the briefest moment, something cold flickered behind her smile. Then it disappeared again. Ethan stood near the dining room, carrying a stack of plates. The moment our eyes met, my chest tightened painfully. He looked thinner than he had only 2 months earlier. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes, and there was a tightness around his mouth I had never seen before Noelle died. "Hey, Mom," he said quietly. I hugged him gently. He held on to me for half a second too long. Vanessa appeared beside us almost immediately. "Dinner is ready," she announced cheerfully. "And Ethan actually managed not to burn anything this year." She laughed softly at her own joke. Ethan lowered his eyes. The dining room table looked like something from a magazine spread. Gold candles, crystal glasses, perfect folded napkins. But beneath all that beauty sat tension thick enough to feel physically in the air. Vanessa controlled every conversation from the moment we sat down. She interrupted Ethan constantly, corrected small details in his stories, answered questions directed at him before he could speak. At one point, I asked whether business had slowed down during the holidays. Ethan opened his mouth, but Vanessa answered first. "He has been overwhelmed lately. Honestly, if I did not handle the financial side of things, he would probably collapse from stress." She smiled while taking a sip of wine. "Some people just are not built to manage pressure." Ethan stared silently at his plate. Something inside me hardened then. Not anger, clarity, because I suddenly understood the real cruelty of what she had done to him. She did not break him loudly. She slowly convinced him he was incapable without her. Halfway through dinner, Vanessa stood and lifted her wine glass with a bright smile. "Actually," she said, "I wanted tonight to be special because Ethan and I have exciting news." Ethan's shoulders immediately tensed. "We are restructuring a few things financially," she continued smoothly. "Possibly selling the lake property and consolidating some remaining family assets into one protected account." My pulse slowed completely. There it was. The final move. Vanessa turned toward me with that same polished expression she always wore when pretending to care about my feelings. "Honestly, Helen, it is for the best. Managing large assets becomes difficult at a certain age." Ethan looked up sharply then. For the first time all evening, something flashed across his face besides exhaustion. Shame. I placed my fork down carefully beside my plate. The room fell quiet except for the faint sound of wind rattling the windows outside. Then I opened my leather bag slowly and removed Noelle's envelopes one at a time onto the dining room table. Vanessa's smile disappeared almost instantly. Ethan stared at the familiar handwriting on the top envelope like someone seeing a ghost. I met my son's eyes calmly across the candlelight. "Your father prepared for storms long before any of us realized one was coming." The entire dining room went silent after I placed Noelle's envelopes on the table. Even the soft Christmas music playing somewhere in the house suddenly felt distant. Vanessa stared at the documents without blinking, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. Across from me, Ethan looked like someone struggling to breathe after being underwater too long. Outside, freezing rain tapped steadily against the windows while candlelight flickered softly across the polished dining table. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Vanessa gave a short, nervous laugh. "I am not really sure what this is supposed to mean," she said lightly. But her voice had changed. The confidence underneath it was cracking. I folded my hands calmly in front of me. "It means Noelle understood our son better than anyone." Ethan lowered his eyes immediately. Vanessa set her wine glass down carefully. "Helen, if this is about the refinancing situation, Ethan and I already discussed everything with financial advisors." "No," I said quietly. "You discussed it." Ethan signed it. Her jaw tightened slightly. Tiny movements reveal more than shouting ever does. I slid one envelope slowly across the table toward Ethan. "Open it." His hands trembled as he lifted the flap. Inside sat copies of the trust protections Noel created before he died, along with handwritten notes explaining every safeguard. I watched Ethan's face change line by line as he read. Confusion first, then realization, then something deeper, grief. Vanessa leaned toward him quickly. Ethan, do not let your mother upset you tonight. He did not answer her. He kept reading silently while his breathing grew uneven. Finally, after what felt like forever, he looked up at me with eyes full of shame. Dad knew, he whispered. I nodded slowly. Your father knew you would blame yourself before asking for help. Vanessa stood abruptly from her chair. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You are acting like I manipulated him. The room fell still again. Ethan slowly turned toward her for the first time all evening. Really looked at her. Did you? He asked quietly. Vanessa blinked hard. Excuse me. His voice remained calm, but something inside it had changed. Did you slowly convince me I could not manage anything without you? She stared at him in disbelief. I supported you. I protected you from stress. You were falling apart after your father died. Ethan laughed softly then, but there was no happiness in the sound. No, he said. I was grieving. The word landed heavily between them. Vanessa's expression hardened immediately. So now I am the villain because I kept this family functioning? I watched Ethan carefully as years of exhaustion seemed to settle visibly across his face. You isolated me from everyone, he said quietly. Even Mom. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. Your mother treats you like a child. I finally spoke again. No. I remember who he was before he stopped trusting himself. Vanessa looked toward me sharply, but for the first time since I met her, I saw uncertainty behind her eyes instead of control. Ethan lowered the papers slowly onto the table. The emergency authorization, he said quietly. You told me signing it was temporary. Vanessa immediately stepped closer to him. Because you were overwhelmed. You could barely sleep. You kept second-guessing every decision. Because every time I disagreed with you. Ethan interrupted softly. You made me feel unstable. Silence followed. Long and cold. Outside, wind rattled the windows harder now as the storm intensified. Across town, Vanessa looked around the room like someone suddenly realizing the walls were no longer protecting her. Then she looked back at Ethan one final time. After everything I did for you, she whispered. Ethan stared down at Noel's handwriting resting beneath his hands. Love is not supposed to make someone disappear. Nobody spoke after that. The candles burned quietly between us while Christmas lights reflected against the dark windows. And for the first time in years, my son no longer looked trapped. He looked exhausted, heartbroken, but awake. I reached across the table and rested my hand gently over his. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, like a man finally allowing himself to stop carrying something too heavy alone. Outside, the storm continued through the night. But inside that dining room, the silence no longer belonged to fear.